Hi, my name is Guðrún Elsa Bragadóttir and I am a PhD candidate at the Comparative Literature Department at the University at Buffalo, New York. I have focused on both literature and film throughout my university education in Iceland and abroad, where my research has primarily centered on the film melodrama, often referred to as the woman's film. I live in my home country of Iceland, where I teach film, both at a college and university level. My contribution to the new publication, Women in the International Film Industry, Policy, Practice and Power, is a chapter titled Out in the Cold, Women Filmmakers in Iceland. The chapter begins with a brief overview of Icelandic film history, where I pay special attention to women's involvement in it. And I found that outlining what could be termed a herstory of Icelandic cinema would be important to facilitate further examination of women's place within the industry, but also because the few historical overviews that have been written on Icelandic film tend to emphasize the lack of films by women rather than the important contributions made by them. Following a discussion of women in Icelandic filmmaking, historically and at the current moment, where statistical information is provided and analyzed, I review the measures that have been taken to increase gender equality in the film industry and those that are planned for the future. I must admit that writing about women in the Icelandic film industry turned out to be a bit of a challenge, mostly because almost no research had been conducted on the subject when I began the process. Thus, in preparing the chapter, I conducted interviews with women filmmakers, VIFT in Iceland and the Icelandic Film Center, and contacted the Census Office, among others, in order to answer the many questions that I had. Since no statistical information was available on women's participation in film, I searched the most extensive databases available on Icelandic filmmaking, tracking down the just over 200 feature films that have been made in Iceland since the first one was released in 1949, and recorded the names and position of each woman involved in the productions. The statistical information provided in this chapter is based on that research. It should be noted that the Census Office published a report providing statistical information about the contribution of female directors versus that of male directors in 2018. The report painted a bleak picture. Men had directed 90% of the 191 films that had been released by the end of 2017, and thus female directors were only responsible for 1/10 of the nation's cinematic output since 1949. I found that if the films released in 2018 and 2019 were taken into account, those numbers do not change. And, contrary to what might be expected, women directors have statistically directed fewer films in the second decade of the new millennium than they did in previous years. Perhaps these numbers should have braced me for the results of my inquiry into the overall involvement of women in the industry, but I was still disturbed to find a similar development when it came to the number of women working within the different areas women have traditionally occupied within the Icelandic film industry. Although the number of films released in 2010 to 2019 rose by more than 50%, the number of women involved in the industry declined, with the notable exception of women producers. It is important to take into consideration the fact that women have always occupied a marginal space within the Icelandic film industry, and that the increase in the number of women working in the industry has never been equal to the expansion of the industry itself. However, the incremental growth that could be seen from 1980 until 2009 came to a halt following the 2009 economic crash. This is a development I discuss further in my chapter, where I propose that the economic crisis might have impaired women's already fragile position within a male-dominated film industry. The final part of my chapter explores the biggest problems within this male-dominated industry, as well as the institutional and governmental actions undertaken and planned to make female presence in the industry more viable. I found that there is still a lot to be done to achieve gender equality within the film industry, but that there are nonetheless 3 key initiatives in place at the moment. One of the main problems pointed out by the Icelandic Film Center and others is getting women involved. Their website provides statistics for the years 2013 to 2018, showing that women amount to a mere 20% of all applicants for applying for funding from the center, which is the sole source of institutional funding for Icelandic filmmakers domestically. However, the approval rate for female applicants is way higher than that of male applicants. VIFT in Iceland shares the Film Center's concerns about the lack of female applicants and has responded to it with the only initiative currently in place to encourage women to enter the film industry, a program called Girls Shoot. The courses, which have been offered to girls from 13 years old to 30 since 2015, cover the basics of filmmaking, script writing, directing, production, cinematography, editing, and other technical aspects of finalizing a short film. In its capacity as the main provider of financial support for Icelandic films, the Icelandic Film Center has responded to the problem of lack of women in film through change in policy. Every year, every 3 to 4 years, the Icelandic government and the main filmmaking bodies make an agreement on general film policy covering the total amount of state financial support for filmmaking for the relevant period. In the current agreement, valid for 2016 to 2019, a special emphasis has been made on increasing the participation of women in key roles of filmmaking. What I consider the most important change now underway, however, is an attempt to change the regulation on the Icelandic Film Fund, set by the Ministry of Culture and Education to allocate a specific percentage of the funding available to female filmmakers. In 2017, the Icelandic Film Center introduced proposals to the Icelandic Ministry of Culture that involves providing films directed, written, or produced by women an additional 20% in funds. The response received from the Ministry of Culture and Education when contacted in preparation for the article I wrote stated that these proposals were under consideration and might be incorporated into the regulation on the Icelandic Film Fund in the near future. Their answer is, in other words, vague. While I would like to address my findings in this chapter to a large audience, especially those involved in filmmaking and funding domestically, reaching the authorities able to implement a change to the regulation on the Icelandic Film Fund would be invaluable. So hopefully this will reach the ears of someone within the Ministry of Culture and Education and inspire them to take this challenge on.